This is the complete science of ketamine. From the operating room to the edge of reality. One molecule, three worlds colliding. Born in 1962 to save soldiers bleeding on Vietnamese battlefields. The anesthetic that kept hearts beating while consciousness floated into otherworldly voids. Patients reported tunnels of light. Encounters with the infinite. Doctors called it dissociation. Then the counterculture discovered it. Ravers seeking escape. Psychonauts exploring inner dimensions. The K-hole, complete severance from reality, journeys through geometric impossibilities, ego death in crystalline form. Now psychiatry's most promising breakthrough. Suicidal patients finding relief within hours. Depression shattered by the same dissociation recreational users chase. The FDA approves it. Clinics proliferate. But so does addiction. Life-saving anesthetic, mind-shattering psychedelic, psychiatric revolution. Ketamine doesn't just alter consciousness. It fractures the boundaries between healing and harm, medicine and recreation, salvation and addiction. The dissociative paradox. Before we begin, if you enjoy these types of interesting science topics, hit the like button, comment, and tell us where you are listening from. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you know what to do. Simply subscribe. In 1962, chemist Calvin Stevens synthesized a new compound in the laboratories of Parker Davis Pharmaceutical Company in Michigan. He was searching for an anesthetic, a drug that could render patients unconscious for surgery without the dangerous side effects plaguing existing options. What he created would become one of the most versatile and controversial molecules in modern medicine. The compound was ketamine. Stevens had been working to improve upon phencyclidine, known as PCP, which had shown promise as an anesthetic, but produced severe emergence reactions. Patients waking from anesthesia experienced terrifying hallucinations, delirium, and psychosis. The medical community needed something better, something that could provide surgical anesthesia without the psychological aftermath that made PCP unusable. Ketamine proved to be that molecule. In early tests, it produced a peculiar state unlike traditional anesthesia. Patients appeared awake, their eyes remained open, they maintained reflexes, but they were profoundly disconnected from their surroundings. Researchers called this state dissociative anesthesia. The body was present, but consciousness seemed to float elsewhere, untethered from sensory input and physical sensation. The molecular structure of ketamine explained these unusual properties. It blocked specific receptors in the brain called NMDA receptors, which are crucial for processing sensory information, forming memories, and maintaining normal consciousness. By interrupting signaling at these receptors, ketamine severed the connection between perception and awareness, creating a state where pain signals reached the brain but failed to register as suffering. This mechanism was revolutionary. Traditional anesthetics worked by globally suppressing brain activity, carrying risks of respiratory depression and cardiovascular instability. Ketamine, by contrast, preserved basic life functions while selectively disrupting consciousness. Patients under ketamine anesthesia continued breathing on their own. Their heart rate and blood pressure remained stable, even slightly elevated. The drug was remarkably safe from a physiological standpoint. By 1965, ketamine received approval for medical use. The military immediately recognized its value. The Vietnam War was escalating, and battlefield medicine demanded an anesthetic that could be administered quickly, required no specialized equipment, and kept wounded soldiers stable during transport. Ketamine met all these requirements. Medics could inject it intramuscularly, no need for intravenous access in chaotic combat conditions. The drug took effect within minutes and lasted long enough to evacuate casualties to surgical facilities. Thousands of soldiers received ketamine on battlefields in Southeast Asia. It saved countless lives, maintaining airways and cardiovascular stability while suppressing the agony of traumatic injuries. But soldiers also experienced the drug's psychological effects. Some reported out-of-body experiences, visions of tunnels and light, encounters with deceased comrades, or feelings of floating above their bodies watching medical teams work. These experiences were sometimes comforting, sometimes disturbing, always profound. Back in civilian medicine, ketamine found applications beyond surgery. Emergency departments used it for painful procedures, resetting broken bones, cleaning wounds, intubating combative patients. Burn units employed it for dressing changes that would otherwise be excruciating. Pediatricians appreciated that children tolerated ketamine well, and the drug's dissociative effects often meant young patients remembered little of traumatic medical procedures. Veterinary medicine embraced ketamine enthusiastically. The drug became a staple for animal surgery, particularly useful for sedating large animals like horses or aggressive animals, where traditional anesthesia posed challenges. Veterinarians could safely immobilize animals for examination and procedures with minimal risk. The ubiquity of ketamine in veterinary clinics would later facilitate its diversion to recreational markets. But even in these early medical applications, clinicians noticed something unusual. Some patients reported that their ketamine experiences were not merely unconsciousness, but something stranger and more meaningful. They described traveling through other dimensions, communicating with entities, experiencing ego dissolution, or gaining insights into their lives and relationships. These reports echoed descriptions from users of psychedelic drugs like LSD or psilocybin, though the character of ketamine experiences was distinctly different, more alien, more geometric, more thoroughly disconnected from ordinary reality. Researchers began studying ketamine's effects on consciousness more carefully. At lower doses, below anesthetic levels, the drug produced a state of intoxication characterized by feelings of floating, distortions of time and space, difficulty speaking or moving, and a dreamlike quality to perception. Users described feeling separated from their bodies, watching themselves from outside, or merging with their surroundings. At higher doses, consciousness could depart entirely from ordinary reality into what users would later call the K-hole, a state of complete dissociation where the external world vanished, and the user existed in purely internal spaces. The psychiatric community took interest. If ketamine could induce states resembling psychosis, hallucinations, thought disorder, ego dissolution, it might serve as a model for studying schizophrenia. Research in the 1970s used ketamine to better understand psychotic disorders, administering controlled doses to volunteers and mapping the resulting cognitive and perceptual changes. But this research had an unintended consequence. It publicized ketamine's consciousness-altering properties. By the mid-1970s, recreational use began appearing. Early users were often people connected to medical or veterinary fields who had access to pharmaceutical ketamine. They discovered that the drug produced intense, brief psychedelic experiences very different from LSD or mushrooms. Ketamine intoxication was shorter, an hour or two rather than 8 to 12, and more intensely dissociative, with less emotional content and more abstract, geometric, otherworldly qualities. The counterculture of the 1970s, already deeply engaged with psychedelic exploration, incorporated ketamine into the pharmacopoeia of consciousness alteration. John Lilly, a neuroscientist known for sensory deprivation research and interspecies communication experiments with dolphins, became a vocal advocate for ketamine's capacity to facilitate exploration of inner space. His writings described using ketamine in isolation tanks, where the combination of sensory deprivation and dissociative anesthesia produced experiences he interpreted as contact with alternate realities or intelligence. Lilly's influence was significant but controversial. His work brought attention to ketamine's unique properties but also exemplified the risks of uncontrolled, high-dose use. Lilly himself struggled with ketamine dependence, using the drug compulsively for years, experiencing psychological deterioration, and eventually pulling back after recognizing the damage. By the 1980s, ketamine occupied a strange position. It remained an essential medical tool, particularly in emergency medicine, pediatric anesthesia, and veterinary practice. Simultaneously, it circulated in small quantities through underground psychedelic communities. The drug was not yet widely known, not yet scheduled as a controlled substance in most jurisdictions, but its reputation was growing. The molecule's journey from laboratory synthesis to battlefield anesthetic to consciousness exploration tool set the stage for everything that followed. Ketamine was a medical necessity and a doorway to altered states, a life-saving drug and a substance of abuse, a tool for healing trauma and a cause of addiction. These contradictions would only intensify as the drug spread beyond medical and psychedelic contexts into mainstream recreational use. Ketamine exists only through synthesis. Unlike plant-based drugs requiring cultivation, ketamine is born in chemical laboratories, assembled molecule by molecule through reactions that transform precursor chemicals into the final product. This synthetic origin gives ketamine certain characteristics: consistent purity in pharmaceutical production, no dependence on geography or seasons, and vulnerability to diversion at multiple points in the supply chain. Pharmaceutical companies manufacture ketamine in facilities operating under strict regulations. The process begins with precursor chemicals compounds that are themselves synthesized or extracted from other sources. Through a series of chemical reactions involving heat, pressure, catalysts, and solvents, these precursors are transformed into ketamine. The specifics of this synthesis will not be detailed here, as providing actionable instructions crosses ethical boundaries. What matters is understanding that pharmaceutical ketamine is produced in carefully controlled environments, with quality assurance at every step. The result is medical-grade ketamine hydrochloride, typically formulated as a clear liquid in sterile vials. Concentrations vary 10 milligrams per milliliter, 50 milligrams per milliliter, or 100 milligrams per milliliter, depending on intended use. These vials are distributed to hospitals, clinics, veterinary offices, and emergency medical services. The supply chain includes manufacturers, distributors, pharmacies, and end users, each link representing a potential point of diversion. Diversion occurs in multiple ways. Healthcare workers with access to pharmaceutical storage may steal vials. Veterinary clinics, often with less stringent security than hospitals, become targets for burglary. Prescriptions, though less common for ketamine than for opioids, can be forged or obtained through corrupt practitioners. Pharmaceutical shipments can be hijacked or diverted through fraudulent orders. In some countries, pharmaceutical regulation is weaker or enforcement inconsistent. India, with a massive pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, became a source for ketamine flowing to international black markets. Companies producing legitimate medical ketamine sometimes produced excess or turned blind eyes to orders from suspicious buyers. International shipping allowed ketamine to move across borders in packages that might contain powdered ketamine or liquid vials depending on the operation. China emerged as another significant source, though not always of ketamine itself. Chinese chemical companies synthesized ketamine analogs, molecules structurally similar to ketamine but technically distinct, existing in legal gray zones as research chemicals. These analogs sometimes appeared in recreational markets labeled as ketamine. Though their effects and safety profiles were unpredictable, China's role in supplying precursor chemicals for drug synthesis globally extended to ketamine production, with precursors shipped to other countries where synthesis occurred. Illicit synthesis of ketamine is more challenging than for some drugs. The process requires specific precursors, some of which are monitored chemicals. It requires chemical expertise and equipment. The synthesis is not especially dangerous like methamphetamine production, but it is technically demanding. For these reasons, most ketamine in recreational markets is diverted pharmaceutical product rather than illicitly synthesized material. However, small-scale illicit production does occur. Underground chemists with training in organic chemistry can produce ketamine if they obtain the necessary precursors and equipment. These operations are rare compared to the diversion of medical supplies, but contribute to overall availability, particularly in regions where pharmaceutical diversion is more difficult. The shift from liquid to powder occurs through a simple process: evaporation. Pharmaceutical ketamine liquid is heated gently, allowing the water and other solvents to evaporate, leaving behind ketamine crystals. Users or dealers perform this conversion, transforming medical vials into the powdered form preferred for snorting. The crystals can be crushed into fine powder, divided into doses, and packaged for sale. This transformation from pharmaceutical preparation to recreational drug illustrates ketamine's dual nature. The same molecule exists in sterile vials, saving lives in emergency rooms and in plastic bags sold at nightclubs. The chemical structure is identical. The difference is context, how it is used, by whom, and for what purpose. Security around pharmaceutical ketamine has increased as recreational use grew. Hospitals track controlled substance inventories more carefully. Veterinary clinics have improved storage security. Regulations in some jurisdictions moved ketamine to schedules requiring stricter controls. But enforcement remains uneven, and demand ensures continued diversion. The global pharmaceutical industry produces ketamine in quantities sufficient for medical need, plus the inevitable leakage into recreational markets. Exact figures are difficult to determine, but millions of vials are manufactured annually. A small percentage diverted from medical channels supplies recreational markets worldwide. This diversion is enabled by the drug's medical legitimacy. Ketamine must be widely available for its essential medical uses, and this availability creates opportunities for diversion. Environmental impact from ketamine production is minimal compared to drugs requiring large-scale agriculture or methamphetamine-style illicit labs. Pharmaceutical synthesis occurs in controlled facilities with waste management. The molecule's synthesis does not generate the toxic byproducts or ecological damage associated with some other drug production. The journey from precursor chemicals to pharmaceutical vials to powdered ketamine involves human choices at every step. Scientists synthesize it for medical benefit. Companies manufacture it for profit and patient care. Healthcare workers administer it to alleviate suffering. And some portion diverts into markets where it is used not for anesthesia, but for the dissociative experiences it produces, for escape, for recreation, or for self-directed exploration of consciousness. As ketamine moves from production into distribution networks, it enters worlds far removed from operating rooms and veterinary clinics. The next chapter traces these routes. The ketamine that arrives from pharmaceutical production is a simple, elegant solution: ketamine hydrochloride dissolved in sterile water or saline. This liquid is designed for injection, intravenous, intramuscular, or subcutaneous administration in medical settings. But recreational users prefer different forms and routes of administration, driving transformations in how the drug appears and how it is consumed. The most common transformation is from liquid to powder. Users or dealers pour pharmaceutical liquid into shallow dishes or trays and apply gentle heat. As water evaporates, ketamine crystals form, sometimes large and geometric, sometimes fine and powdery depending on evaporation speed and technique. These crystals are scraped up, crushed into fine powder if necessary, and packaged for distribution. Powdered ketamine can be snorted, the most common route of recreational consumption. The powder is arranged into lines and insufflated through the nose. Absorption through nasal mucosa is efficient, with effects beginning within 5 to 15 minutes and peaking around 30 to 45 minutes after administration. Duration is relatively short, 1 to 2 hours, for a typical recreational dose, making ketamine suitable for contexts where users want intense but time-limited experiences. Snorting causes some discomfort. Ketamine powder irritates nasal tissues, producing burning sensations and causing the bitter drip as material dissolves and drains into the throat. Chronic snorting damages nasal passages, causing perforation of the septum in heavy users, similar to cocaine's effects. But the convenience and rapid onset make snorting the dominant method in recreational contexts. Injection remains an option, particularly for those diverting pharmaceutical liquid directly. Intramuscular injection produces effects more rapidly than snorting within minutes, with intensity between snorted and intravenous administration. Some users prefer this route for the reliability and completeness of effects. However, injection carries risks. Infection from non-sterile technique, vein damage from repeated injection, and the potential for accidentally injecting air or contaminants. Intravenous injection produces the most rapid and intense effects, essentially instantaneous onset with peak intensity within seconds. This route is less common recreationally because it requires more preparation and skill, carries higher risks, and produces effects so sudden and overwhelming that users have little time to prepare psychologically. Medical ketamine administration is often intravenous, precisely because of this rapid onset and control over anesthesia depth. Oral consumption is possible but inefficient. Ketamine is broken down by first-pass metabolism in the liver, reducing bioavailability significantly. Oral doses must be much higher to produce effects comparable to snorted or injected ketamine. Some users consume ketamine orally when other routes are impractical, and some clinics exploring ketamine for depression have investigated oral formulations. But this remains a minority approach. The chemistry of ketamine's effects centers on NMDA receptor antagonism. NMDA receptors are critical for a neurotransmitter called glutamate, which is the brain's primary excitatory signal. Glutamate drives neural activity, facilitating communication between brain regions, enabling learning and memory formation, and maintaining normal consciousness. By blocking NMDA receptors, ketamine disrupts glutamate signaling, fragmenting normal patterns of brain activity. This disruption produces dissociation. At low doses, users feel slightly detached, as if observing themselves from slight distance. Sensory input becomes muted or strange. Movement may feel mechanical or disconnected. As doses increase, dissociation deepens. Users may feel completely separated from their bodies, unable to move or speak, perceiving themselves as floating or existing outside physical form. The K-hole, the term for complete dissociative states, at high doses represents the extreme of this spectrum. In a K-hole, external reality essentially vanishes. Users experience purely internal spaces, tunnels, voids, geometric landscapes, encounters with entities or presences, dissolution of self-boundaries, or states beyond language or describable experience. Some find this terrifying, others transcendent. The experience is profoundly dose-dependent, with small increases in dose creating dramatic increases in intensity. Ketamine exists as two mirror image molecules, enantiomers called S-ketamine and R-ketamine. Most pharmaceutical ketamine is a mixture of both, called racemic ketamine. However, S-ketamine is roughly twice as potent as R-ketamine. Pharmaceutical companies have developed pure S-ketamine formulations for specific applications, particularly the esketamine nasal spray approved for treatment-resistant depression. This formulation allows more precise dosing and potentially fewer side effects. The transformation of ketamine from anesthetic to antidepressant represents one of the most significant developments in psychiatry in decades. Research beginning in the 2000s demonstrated that low-dose ketamine infusions produced rapid and profound antidepressant effects, often within hours, in patients who had failed multiple other treatments. This was revolutionary. Traditional antidepressants take weeks to work, and many patients never respond adequately. The mechanism appears to involve ketamine's effects on glutamate, signaling triggering neuroplasticity, the growth of new neural connections. By blocking NMDA receptors, ketamine paradoxically increases glutamate release, activating other receptors and triggering cascades that promote synaptic growth. This strengthening and expansion of neural networks may underlie both ketamine's antidepressant effects and its psychedelic properties. Ketamine clinics emerged in the 2010s, offering intravenous infusions or intranasal esketamine to patients with depression, PTSD, anxiety, and chronic pain. These clinics operate in legal frameworks because ketamine is an approved medication being used off-label or, in the case of esketamine, explicitly approved for treatment-resistant depression. Patients receive carefully dosed ketamine in clinical settings with medical supervision, paying out-of-pocket fees that can be substantial. This medical renaissance complicated ketamine's cultural position. The drug was simultaneously a party drug snorted in nightclub bathrooms and a cutting-edge psychiatric treatment administered in medical offices. The same dissociative effects that recreational users sought for escape or entertainment were being harnessed therapeutically to break patterns of depression and suicidal thinking. The distinction between pharmaceutical and recreational ketamine became less about the molecule, which is identical, and more about dose, setting, intention, and support. A low dose administered in a therapeutic context with integration therapy is vastly different from a high dose taken at a rave for dissociative euphoria, even though the pharmacology is the same. Purity in recreational markets varies. Pharmaceutical diversion provides high-purity ketamine identical to medical product, but ketamine can be cut with other white powders, lactose, caffeine, or other stimulants. More concerning, other dissociatives or research chemicals are sometimes sold as ketamine. PCP, though less common now, has appeared as ketamine. Methoxetamine, a ketamine analog, circulated in the 2010s marketed as a legal alternative. These substitutions carry unpredictable risks. Testing services, available in some regions as part of harm reduction efforts, allow users to verify purity and identity of substances. But most users lack access to such services and must trust suppliers or rely on subjective effects to judge what they have consumed. The transformation from pharmaceutical liquid to recreational powder to therapeutic nasal spray illustrates ketamine's versatility and the human capacity to find multiple uses for a single molecule. As ketamine reaches consumers in these various forms, it enters contexts as diverse as emergency departments, underground psychedelic ceremonies, nightclubs, and psychiatrists' offices. The next chapter maps these routes, Ketamine's journey from production to consumption follows pathways that overlap with but differ from traditional drug trafficking routes. Because ketamine originates primarily in pharmaceutical facilities rather than clandestine labs or agricultural regions, the routes reflect diversion from medical supply chains more than smuggling from producing countries. In the early decades after ketamine's introduction, recreational use remained relatively contained. Medical professionals and those connected to healthcare had access through their work. Veterinarians and veterinary technicians diverted supplies from animal clinics. These early users were often middle-class, educated individuals, not the demographic typically associated with drug trafficking. Use spread through social networks, word of mouth, and underground publications describing psychedelic experiences. The 1990s brought significant change. The emergence of rave culture, all-night electronic music dance parties created demand for drugs that enhanced the experience. MDMA was the primary rave drug, but ketamine found a niche. Its dissociative effects provided escape from the intensity of crowds and music, offering users a break from sensory overload. Small doses produced pleasant detachment, while larger doses allowed complete withdrawal into internal space. Ketamine became known as a club drug, grouped with MDMA, GHB, and Rohypnol, though its effects were quite different. Dealers began supplying rave and club scenes, obtaining pharmaceutical ketamine through various diversion methods and converting it to powder for sale. Prices were relatively high compared to other drugs. Supply was limited and diversion carried risks, but demand among certain demographics supported a viable market. Geographic patterns emerged. In the United Kingdom, ketamine use in club scenes was notably high. London and other urban centers saw widespread availability. India's pharmaceutical industry contributed to global supply, with ketamine diverted from legitimate production and shipped internationally. Chinese chemical suppliers entered the market, producing ketamine analogs and sometimes ketamine itself for export. In the United States, ketamine use remained more scattered. Certain cities and scenes, particularly those with established psychedelic cultures, saw higher use. Music festivals, especially those associated with electronic music or jam bands, became sites of ketamine consumption. But ketamine never achieved the ubiquity of marijuana, cocaine, or even MDMA. Veterinary clinics became frequent targets for thieves seeking ketamine. Break-ins at veterinary offices often focused on controlled substance cabinets. The relatively lax security compared to hospitals made veterinary supplies attractive. Veterinarians reported thefts regularly, and some clinics were targeted repeatedly. This pattern was so consistent that veterinary associations issued guidance on improving security specifically to prevent ketamine diversion. Healthcare worker diversion represented another significant source. Anesthesiologists, emergency department nurses, and surgical staff with access to pharmaceutical supplies sometimes diverted ketamine. This occurred through outright theft, falsification of records, or administration of partial doses to patients while diverting the remainder. Healthcare systems developed better tracking and monitoring, but determined individuals with access could still divert materials. The internet transformed distribution. Online marketplaces, operating both on the clear web and through darknet platforms accessible via encrypted browsers, connected buyers and sellers globally. Pharmaceutical ketamine could be ordered internationally, shipped in packages that resembled legitimate mail. Chinese suppliers offered ketamine and analogs through websites operating in legal gray areas. Buyers used cryptocurrency for payment, maintaining anonymity. Precursor chemicals for ketamine synthesis also moved through international channels. While complete, illicit synthesis was less common than diversion, it occurred in some regions. Precursors diverted from chemical suppliers enabled small-scale production. Regulations attempted to control precursor access, but the global chemical industry's vastness provided ample opportunities for diversion. Law enforcement responses varied widely. In some jurisdictions, ketamine remained unscheduled or lightly controlled for years, allowing legal possession even as recreational use grew. Eventually, most countries scheduled ketamine as a controlled substance, but enforcement priorities remained low compared to opioids, cocaine, or methamphetamine. Ketamine users and dealers faced less aggressive prosecution, and sentences when convictions occurred tended to be lighter. This relatively lenient approach reflected several factors. Ketamine was not associated with the violent crimes surrounding cocaine or methamphetamine markets. Overdose deaths, while they occurred, were far rarer than with opioids. The drug's medical necessity meant completely restricting access would harm patients needing it for legitimate purposes, and stereotypes about ketamine users often perceived as middle class, educated, less threatening, may have influenced enforcement priorities, though this reflected biases in drug policy more broadly. Trafficking organizations did not dominate ketamine markets the way they controlled cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine. The decentralized nature of pharmaceutical diversion meant supply was distributed rather than concentrated. Small-scale dealers, often users themselves, obtained ketamine through personal connections to medical or veterinary sources and sold to small networks. Large-scale trafficking operations occasionally appeared, particularly involving international shipments, but these were exceptions rather than the norm. Music festivals became focal points for ketamine distribution. Dealers would attend festivals knowing demand would be high. Users sought ketamine as part of multi-drug experiences, combining it with psychedelics, MDMA, or alcohol in ways that increased risks, but were culturally normalized within festival contexts. Harm reduction organizations began providing drug testing services at festivals, allowing users to verify substance identity and purity, though access to such services remained limited. The routes ketamine traveled were less about geography and more about professional and social networks. A vial diverted from a veterinary clinic in rural America might be evaporated to powder, sold to a dealer with connections to urban club scenes, and consumed by users across multiple states. A pharmaceutical shipment from India might reach buyers in Europe through online marketplaces and international post. The pathways were fluid, opportunistic, following access and demand rather than fixed trafficking routes. As ketamine arrived in consumers' hands, its meaning and use varied dramatically by context. The next chapter explores these diverse settings and the people who use ketamine. Ketamine reaches consumers in forms that reflect its pharmaceutical origins and recreational adaptations. Liquid vials, still in pharmaceutical packaging, circulate among those with connections to medical or veterinary sources. Powder, ranging from coarse crystals to fine dust, is more common in recreational markets. Pills occasionally appear, though these are less typical. The form shapes how ketamine is used and in what contexts. In club and rave settings, ketamine is typically snorted. Users arrange powder into lines on flat surfaces, phones, CDs, mirrors, and insufflate through rolled bills or straws. The social ritual resembles cocaine use, but the effects are entirely different. Where cocaine energizes and increases social engagement, ketamine sedates and withdraws users into internal experience. Ketamine users at parties often seek quiet corners or chill-out spaces when effects intensify. Movement becomes difficult, coordination impaired, speech slurred or nonsensical. The experience is not conducive to dancing or socializing at higher doses. Some users take small amounts throughout an event, maintaining mild dissociation without complete incapacitation. Others take larger doses intentionally seeking the K-hole, often sitting or lying down in safe spaces while experiencing complete dissociation. The culture around ketamine use in these contexts is distinct. Unlike stimulants that drive continued partying, ketamine provides pause, introspection, or escape. Some describe it as a reset button for overwhelmed minds. The dissociative state offers relief from sensory overload, anxiety, or emotional distress, but the same effects create vulnerability. Users unable to move or speak coherently are at risk for exploitation, injury from falls, or dangerous decisions while impaired. Demographics of recreational ketamine use are diverse, but skew towards certain populations. In the 1990s and 2000s, use was highest among people involved in rave and electronic music scenes, typically young adults from various socioeconomic backgrounds. In the 2010s, ketamine use expanded into broader populations, appearing in urban nightlife, college campuses, and music festivals across genres. The LGBTQ+ community, particularly in urban centers, showed elevated ketamine use in some contexts. Club drugs generally, and ketamine specifically, became part of nightlife culture in gay clubs and circuit parties. The reasons are complex: seeking transcendent experiences, coping with minority stress, the role of nightlife in community formation. But patterns of higher use are documented and have public health implications. Ketamine's emergence in therapeutic contexts created an entirely different user population. Patients receiving ketamine infusions or esketamine nasal spray for depression are demographically diverse, but united by treatment-resistant mental illness. These are people who have tried multiple antidepressants without relief, who struggle with severe depression, suicidal ideation, or PTSD. For them, ketamine is not recreation but desperation, a last hope for relief. Therapeutic ketamine administration occurs in clinical settings. Patients recline in comfortable chairs in medical offices. They receive carefully calculated doses via intravenous infusion over 40 to 60 minutes, or intranasal spray. Medical staff monitor vital signs. The dissociative experience is framed as part of treatment, not intoxication. Patients are encouraged to relax, close their eyes, and allow the experience to unfold. Some clinics provide music or eye masks. Integration therapy, discussing insights or experiences afterward with a therapist, is considered essential for maximizing benefits. This medicalized approach contrasts sharply with recreational use. Dose, setting, preparation, and integration all differ fundamentally, yet the pharmacology is identical. The same dissociation that recreational users seek for escape is being harnessed therapeutically to disrupt depressive thought patterns and facilitate neuroplasticity. Underground psychedelic therapy represents a middle ground. Some therapists, working outside legal frameworks, use ketamine in guided sessions for clients seeking healing from trauma, exploring consciousness, or addressing existential distress. These practitioners often have training in psychotherapy and intentionally structure sessions to maximize therapeutic benefit. Clients are screened, prepared through preliminary sessions, guided during the experience, and supported through integration afterward. This underground practice exists in legal gray areas. Ketamine is a controlled substance, and its use outside medical contexts is illegal in most jurisdictions. But enforcement rarely targets therapists using ketamine in private practice settings, particularly when framed as treatment rather than recreation. The ethical questions are complex. These practitioners believe they are providing valuable care to people in need, yet they operate outside regulatory oversight that protects patient safety. Price variations reflect these different contexts. Recreational ketamine powder might cost $30 to $100 per gram depending on location, quality, and dealer. A single gram can provide multiple doses for typical users. Therapeutic ketamine infusions cost dramatically more, $400 to $800 per session, because they include medical supervision, clinical space, and professional administration. Ketamine nasal spray, approved by the FDA, costs thousands of dollars per treatment course, though insurance sometimes covers it. These price differences create inequities. Wealthy patients can access ketamine therapy through legal medical channels. Middle-class and poor patients, unless they qualify for research studies or find subsidized clinics, cannot afford treatment. Some turn to illicit sources, attempting to self-medicate with recreational ketamine, but without medical supervision, appropriate dosing, or therapeutic support. Outcomes are unpredictable and risks increase. Cultural attitudes toward ketamine vary significantly across regions and communities. In some contexts, it is seen as a dangerous dissociative drug of abuse. In others, a consciousness exploration tool. In clinical settings, a breakthrough psychiatric medication. These varying perceptions shape how use is stigmatized or normalized, how openly people discuss their ketamine use, and what resources are available for those experiencing problems. Young people encountering ketamine often lack education about risks, information about appropriate dosing, avoiding mixtures with other drugs, recognizing problematic use patterns, and seeking help when needed is not readily available. Harm reduction organizations provide some education, but reach is limited. The result is learning through trial and error, with predictable consequences for some users. Ketamine in consumer hands is many things simultaneously: anesthetic, antidepressant, party drug, consciousness exploration tool, and for some, addictive substance leading to serious health consequences. As ketamine enters the body through whichever route users choose, its effects on brain and consciousness unfold in ways both remarkable and potentially harmful. The ketamine molecule, once absorbed through nasal mucosa, muscle tissue, or directly into the bloodstream, reaches the brain within minutes or seconds depending on route of administration. The blood-brain barrier, which restricts many substances, allows ketamine passage with ease. Once inside neural tissue, the molecule seeks out specific targets, NMDA receptors embedded in the membranes of neurons throughout the brain. NMDA receptors are gates for glutamate, the brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter. These receptors play crucial roles in neural communication, learning, memory formation, and the maintenance of normal conscious awareness. When glutamate binds to NMDA receptors, calcium floods into neurons, triggering cascades of activity that underlie thought, perception, and consciousness itself. Ketamine blocks these receptors. It fits into the receptor's channel, preventing glutamate from exerting its normal effects. This blockade disrupts the intricate patterns of neural activity that constitute normal consciousness. The disruption is not uniform. Different brain regions contain different densities of NMDA receptors, and ketamine's effects are therefore regionally specific and dose-dependent. At low doses, around 0.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight for intranasal use, effects are subtle. Users report feelings of lightness, slight detachment from surroundings, mild euphoria, and reduced anxiety. Colors may seem slightly more vivid. Thoughts may drift in unusual directions, but users remain oriented to their environment, capable of conversation and movement, functionally intact even if noticeably altered. As doses increase into moderate range, around 1 milligram per kilogram, dissociation becomes pronounced. the sensation of being in one's body diminishes. Users describe feeling like they are observing themselves from outside, as if consciousness has detached and floated a few feet away. Movement becomes difficult and uncoordinated. Speech slurs or stops entirely. Time distorts dramatically. Minutes feel like hours or collapse into instants. Visual perception changes in characteristic ways. Objects may appear to recede or approach without actually moving. Depth perception fails. Environments take on dreamlike qualities, familiar places seeming foreign. At higher moderate doses, eyes-closed visuals emerge. Geometric patterns, tunnels, gridwork. Abstract spaces that feel more real than ordinary perception. The physical experience is equally distinctive. Ketamine produces analgesia pain relief by disrupting the transmission and processing of pain signals. Users lose sensation in limbs, feeling numb or rubbery. This analgesia is powerful enough that ketamine is used surgically, a testament to its potency. But it also creates danger. When used recreationally, injuries may go unnoticed, and users may find themselves in physically precarious situations without awareness of risk. At high doses, above 1.5 milligrams per kilogram or more, depending on individual sensitivity and tolerance, users enter the K-hole. This is the state of complete dissociation where connection to external reality severs entirely. Users are typically immobile, eyes open but unseeing, unresponsive to external stimuli. Internally, experiences range from terrifying to transcendent. Some users describe the K-hole as traveling through tunnels or voids, encountering vast spaces of geometric complexity, or experiencing ego dissolution where the sense of being a separate self disappears entirely. Time becomes meaningless. Some report encounters with entities or presences. Others experience themselves as pure consciousness, without body or identity. Still others find themselves in scenarios or narratives that feel entirely real, but bear no relation to consensus reality. These experiences are not hallucinations in the usual sense. Users are not seeing things superimposed on reality like with stimulant psychosis or delirium. Rather, ordinary reality has been replaced by internally generated perceptual worlds. The brain, cut off from normal sensory input by ketamine's blockade of NMDA receptors, generates its own content, drawing from memory, imagination, and the strange geometries that emerge from disrupted neural networks. The K-hole is temporary. As ketamine is metabolized and leaves the brain, connection to reality gradually returns. Users report re-entering their bodies, awareness of surroundings trickling back, movement and speech slowly becoming possible again. The transition from complete dissociation to normal consciousness can take 15 to 45 minutes, a period users describe as emerging or coming back. The psychological interpretation of ketamine experiences varies wildly. Some users view them as glimpses of alternate dimensions or spiritual realities. Others understand them as purely neurochemical phenomena, brain states without external reference. Therapeutic use frames the experiences as opportunities to observe thought patterns from outside, gain perspective on life issues, or access suppressed emotions. Recreational users may seek the experiences for novelty, escape, or the sheer intensity. Physiologically, ketamine's effects extend beyond the brain. Heart rate and blood pressure typically increase, though usually remaining within safe ranges for healthy individuals. This sympathetic activation is why ketamine was valuable in emergency medicine. It kept cardiovascular systems stable under conditions where other anesthetics caused dangerous drops in blood pressure. Respiration is usually preserved. Unlike opioids, which suppress breathing and can cause fatal overdose. Ketamine does not significantly depress respiratory drive at typical doses. However, at very high doses or in combination with other sedatives, respiratory depression can occur. Aspiration, inhaling vomit while unconscious is a risk, particularly if users are lying on their backs. Nausea is common, especially as effects wear off. Users may vomit as they emerge from deep dissociation, a dangerous scenario if they are still too impaired to protect their airways. This risk is one reason medical ketamine administration includes monitoring and positioning patients appropriately. Motor coordination is severely impaired. Users cannot walk steadily, if at all. Fine motor control disappears. This creates significant injury risk: falls, accidents, wandering into dangerous situations. In club settings, intoxicated users become vulnerable to theft, assault, or exploitation because they cannot defend themselves or make sound decisions. The duration of ketamine intoxication depends on dose and route. Insufflated ketamine produces effects lasting 1 to 2 hours. Injected ketamine acts faster, but has similar total duration. The high-dose K-hole experience may last 30 to 60 minutes at peak intensity, with gradual return over another 30 to 60 minutes. Compared to LSD's 8 to 12 hours, or alcohol's variable but often prolonged intoxication, ketamine is relatively brief. Tolerance develops with regular use. Users find they need higher doses to achieve the same effects. This tolerance is partially due to pharmacokinetic changes. The body becomes more efficient at metabolizing ketamine and partially pharmacodynamic. The brain adapts to chronic NMDA receptor blockade. Tolerance can reach the point where users are consuming doses that would render first-time users completely incapacitated, but producing only moderate effects in chronic users. The subjective value of ketamine experiences divides users. Some find dissociation profoundly meaningful, describing insights into their lives, relief from psychological distress, or experiences of transcendence that feel more real than ordinary consciousness. Others find it disturbing, unpleasant, or empty. These individual differences likely reflect personality, expectations, setting, dose, and brain chemistry variations. What is undeniable is ketamine's power to radically alter consciousness. The state it produces is unlike sobriety, unlike alcohol intoxication, unlike psychedelic or opioid experiences. It occupies its own category, dissociative and strange, offering both therapeutic potential and significant risks as regular use extends over months and years. Ketamine's safety profile, in medical contexts with controlled dosing and short-term use, is excellent. The drug has been used in millions of surgical procedures over 6 decades without major safety concerns. But this medical safety does not automatically extend to chronic recreational use, where doses, frequency, and context differ fundamentally. The most serious physical consequence of chronic heavy ketamine use is bladder damage, specifically ketamine-induced ulcerative cystitis. This condition involves inflammation and degradation of the bladder lining, causing frequent, painful, urgent urination, blood in urine, and in severe cases, reduced bladder capacity and incontinence. The mechanism is not fully understood but may involve ketamine metabolites directly damaging bladder tissue or triggering immune responses. This complication was first identified in the mid-2000s as chronic ketamine use became more common. Users reporting urinary symptoms were found to have bladder inflammation, sometimes severe enough to require surgical intervention. The damage can be irreversible, leaving users with permanent urinary dysfunction. The condition is dose and duration related. Occasional use rarely causes problems. but daily or near-daily use significantly increases risk. Treatment involves cessation of ketamine use, which allows some recovery, though severe cases may not improve completely. Anti-inflammatory medications, bladder installations, and in extreme cases, surgical procedures including bladder removal and reconstruction may be necessary. The condition is debilitating and illustrates that ketamine, despite its safety in short-term medical use, carries serious risks with chronic abuse. Beyond bladder damage, heavy ketamine use causes cognitive impairment. Memory problems are most prominent. Users struggle to form new memories or recall recent events. Attention and concentration deteriorate. Executive function planning, decision-making, impulse control declines. These impairments are most severe during periods of heavy use, but may persist weeks or months after cessation. The mechanism likely involves disruption of glutamate signaling, which is essential for learning and memory. Chronic ketamine use may cause lasting changes in NMDA receptor expression and function. Some brain imaging studies suggest structural changes in heavy users, including reduced volume in certain brain regions. The extent to which these changes reverse with abstinence remains uncertain. Psychological dependence on ketamine develops in some regular users. This is not the same as physical dependence seen with opioids or alcohol, where the body adapts and withdrawal causes physiological illness. Ketamine withdrawal is primarily psychological. Users experience intense cravings, depression, anxiety, and difficulty experiencing pleasure without the drug. These symptoms drive continued use despite negative consequences. The reinforcing properties of ketamine are complex. Some users report that ketamine is not particularly addictive, that they can use occasionally without developing compulsive patterns. Others find themselves using daily, unable to stop despite recognizing harm. Individual vulnerability likely reflects genetic factors, co-occurring mental health conditions, environmental stressors, and the contexts in which ketamine is used. When compulsive use develops, consequences accumulate. Employment suffers as users miss work or perform poorly. Relationships deteriorate. Financial resources drain as money goes toward obtaining ketamine. Legal problems may arise from possession charges, and health declines, both from ketamine's direct effects and from neglect of basic self-care. Treatment for ketamine use disorder is challenging. Unlike opioids, there are no medications that specifically block ketamine's effects or ease withdrawal. Behavioral therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy, motivational interviewing, contingency management show some effectiveness. Residential treatment provides structure and separation from drug-using environments. Support groups offer community and accountability, but treatment capacity is limited, and many users lack access or resources. The therapeutic uses of ketamine complicate the addiction narrative. How can a substance be both addiction treatment and addictive? The answer lies in dose, frequency, and context. Low dose, ketamine administered occasionally in therapeutic settings with integration. Therapy helps many patients with depression without causing addiction. High-dose recreational use, particularly daily or near daily, carries addiction risk. Both statements can be true simultaneously. Ketamine's role in treating depression represents one of the most promising developments in psychiatry in decades. Clinical trials have consistently shown that low-dose ketamine infusions produce rapid antidepressant effects, often within hours. In patients with treatment-resistant depression, the effects are not permanent. They typically last days to weeks, requiring repeated treatments. But for people who have suffered years of unremitting depression despite multiple medication trials, even temporary relief is life-changing. The antidepressant mechanism appears distinct from ketamine's acute dissociative effects. While some researchers believe the psychedelic experience contributes to therapeutic benefit, evidence suggests that the neuroplastic effects, the promotion of new synaptic connections triggered by transient increases in glutamate release drive antidepressant. Response: patients may experience dissociation during treatment, but relief from depression persists long after dissociation resolves. Ketamine nasal spray, approved by the FDA for treatment-resistant depression, provides standardized dosing and administration. Patients use the spray under medical supervision, remaining in the clinic for monitoring after administration. The approval represented recognition that ketamine's benefits can outweigh risks when used appropriately, but costs remain high, and insurance coverage is inconsistent. The therapeutic renaissance has sparked concern about recreational users self-medicating depression with diverted ketamine. Without appropriate dosing, medical supervision, or therapeutic support, outcomes are unpredictable. Some may experience relief, but many will not, and risks of developing problematic use patterns increase without professional guidance. Compared to other dissociatives, ketamine is relatively well tolerated. PCP, the drug ketamine was designed to replace, causes more severe psychotomimetic effects, and has higher addiction potential. Dextromethorphan, found in cough medicines and used recreationally at high doses, produces dissociation, but with more unpleasant side effects. Nitrous oxide, another dissociative, has very short duration and, with chronic heavy use, causes nerve damage from vitamin B12 depletion. Ketamine sits in a unique position, medically essential, therapeutically promising, recreationally used, and potentially harmful with chronic abuse. The balance between benefit and risk depends entirely on how the molecule is used. In operating rooms and psychiatric clinics, it saves lives and alleviates suffering. In uncontrolled recreational contexts, it can cause addiction, bladder damage, and cognitive impairment. The molecule itself is neutral. Human choices determine outcomes. The final chapter examines the broader cultural, medical, and social dimensions of ketamine's journey. Ketamine's trajectory from battlefield anesthetic to club drug to psychiatric breakthrough traces the complex relationships between molecules, medicine, culture, and human need. Few substances embody such contradictions: essential and dangerous, healing and harmful, tightly controlled and widely diverted. The molecule's medical legitimacy has always distinguished it from drugs like heroin or methamphetamine, which exist almost entirely in illicit contexts. Ketamine is in every hospital, every emergency department, many veterinary clinics. It is on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines, recognized as crucial for basic health care. This legitimacy shapes how societies respond to recreational use. Enforcement is less aggressive, stigma less severe, and pathways to treatment more accessible than for drugs without medical applications. But this legitimacy also creates tensions. When the same drug is used to sedate children for emergency procedures and snorted in nightclub bathrooms, how should society respond? Restricting medical access to prevent diversion harms patients who need ketamine for legitimate purposes, but allowing widespread availability enables recreational use and potential addiction. The psychedelic renaissance of the 2010s placed ketamine at the forefront of a broader reconsideration of consciousness-altering drugs. Psilocybin, MDMA, and LSD entered clinical trials for various psychiatric conditions, challenging decades of prohibition and stigma. Ketamine, already medically approved and widely available, became the vanguard of this movement. Therapeutic ketamine clinics proliferated, operating in legal gray areas where off-label prescribing and medical discretion allowed. Some clinics were operated by conscientious psychiatrists, carefully screening patients and providing comprehensive care. Others were profit-driven operations with minimal oversight, providing ketamine to anyone willing to pay with limited assessment or follow-up. This variability raised concerns about quality of care and potential for abuse. The FDA's approval of esketamine for treatment-resistant depression brought legitimacy but also controversy. The approval process was accelerated based on evidence some experts considered insufficient. The medication is expensive, patented, and marketed aggressively. Critics argued this was pharmaceutical companies patenting a decades-old generic drug by isolating one enantiomer and charging exorbitant prices. Supporters countered that bringing ketamine into formal psychiatric practice would improve access and standardization. The tension between recreational and medical use reflects broader questions about drug policy. Should substances be evaluated solely on potential for harm, or should therapeutic benefits be weighed equally? If a drug effectively treats life-threatening depression, does that justify medical access, even if some recreational use and diversion are inevitable? Different societies answer differently, but most have concluded that ketamine's medical value warrants its continued availability despite recreational use. Indigenous perspectives are largely absent from ketamine's story because the drug has no traditional use by indigenous peoples. It is entirely a product of Western pharmaceutical development. This distinguishes it from psilocybin, ayahuasca, or peyote, where questions of cultural appropriation and respect for traditional knowledge are central. Ketamine's story is one of laboratory synthesis, military application, and medical adoption spreading globally through pharmaceutical networks. The veterans who received ketamine on battlefields in Vietnam, who may have had mystical experiences while wounded, processing trauma while dissociated from their injuries, their stories are rarely told. How did those experiences shape their relationship with trauma, their memories of war, their mental health in the decades that followed? These questions remain largely unexplored, though they might offer insights into ketamine's therapeutic mechanisms. The recreational users who found in ketamine an escape from depression, anxiety, or existential distress years before psychiatric medicine recognized its antidepressant properties, they too hold knowledge. Their experiences, dismissed as drug abuse, may have contained the seeds of therapeutic insight later validated by clinical trials. This pattern recurs across psychedelic history, marginalized users discovering beneficial effects through self-experimentation, only for medical establishment to later codify and monetize those discoveries. Harm reduction approaches to ketamine use emphasize education about risks. Testing to verify substance identity and purity reduces exposure to adulterants or misrepresented drugs. Information about appropriate dosing, avoiding combinations with other sedatives, and recognizing bladder symptoms early allows users to make informed choices. Not using alone, having a trusted person present, and avoiding dangerous environments all reduce risks. But harm reduction remains controversial. Critics argue it normalizes drug use and sends mixed messages. Proponents respond that people will use drugs regardless, and reducing harms is both ethical and pragmatic. The evidence supports harm reduction. Regions implementing such approaches see reduced overdose deaths, disease transmission, and long-term health consequences without increased overall drug use. The question of ketamine's future depends on multiple trajectories. Will therapeutic use expand, making ketamine a standard psychiatric treatment? Will better understanding of mechanisms lead to improved formulations or related compounds with fewer side effects? Will recreational use increase as awareness spreads? Or will concerns about bladder damage and addiction dampen enthusiasm? pharmaceutical research continues exploring ketamine's therapeutic potential. Studies investigate its use for PTSD, anxiety disorders, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and substance use disorders. If evidence supports efficacy, ketamine's role in psychiatry will expand further. Alternatively, if concerns about diversion and abuse grow, prescribing may become more restricted. The rise of therapeutic psychedelic use, psilocybin, MDMA, LSD in clinical trials, may eventually overshadow ketamine. These substances are being developed in formulations designed for therapeutic use, with comprehensive training programs for practitioners and integration support for patients. If these substances achieve FDA approval and become available, they may offer alternatives to ketamine with different risk-benefit profiles. The bladder damage issue remains poorly understood. Why does chronic ketamine use cause this specific harm? Can it be prevented or reversed? Research is limited, and many questions remain unanswered. If safer methods of achieving ketamine's therapeutic benefits could be developed, whether through different routes of administration, dosing schedules, or related molecules, this would significantly shift risk-benefit calculations. The story of ketamine is ultimately about human attempts to alleviate suffering using molecules that alter consciousness. Anesthesia eliminates the suffering of surgery. Antidepressants reduce the suffering of depression. Recreational drugs offer temporary escape from the suffering of daily existence. These uses exist on a continuum, not in separate categories. The molecule is the same. The intentions and contexts differ. Families affected by ketamine addiction struggle with a substance that does not fit familiar narratives. There are no overdose deaths, no heroin-style physical dependence, no methamphetamine-style violence. But there is personality change, cognitive decline, financial devastation, and health consequences. Support systems designed for other substance use disorders do not always translate well to ketamine. Healthcare providers face dilemmas when patients request ketamine for depression but have histories of substance use. Is providing treatment enabling addiction, or is withholding it denying effective care? Balancing these concerns requires nuance and individualized assessment, but clear guidance is often lacking. The broader cultural shift toward accepting that consciousness alteration can be therapeutic, that dissociation can be healing, that molecules can catalyze psychological growth. This shift, of which ketamine is part, represents a significant departure from 20th century drug policy. Whether this shift continues, consolidates into new norms, or provokes backlash remains uncertain. What is certain is that ketamine will remain part of medicine. It is too valuable as an anesthetic, too promising as an antidepressant, too embedded in medical practice to disappear. Simultaneously, recreational use will continue, fed by diversion and by people seeking the experiences ketamine provides. The molecule that Calvin Stevens synthesized in 1962, hoping to create a safer anesthetic, has exceeded anyone's expectations. It has saved lives on battlefields and in emergency departments. It has provided escape for people seeking relief from reality. It has opened doors to understanding consciousness and treating depression. And it has caused harm to those who used it compulsively without understanding risks. Ketamine's journey is not finished. Research continues, clinical applications expand, recreational use evolves, and societies grapple with how to maximize benefits while minimizing harms. The molecule itself is indifferent to these human concerns. It simply exists, a specific arrangement of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and chlorine atoms, capable of producing effects both remarkable and troubling when it enters human brains. The story of ketamine is the story of human beings seeking to understand and alter consciousness, to relieve suffering, to explore inner space, and to find meaning in experiences beyond ordinary awareness. Whether those seeks lead to healing or harm depends not on the molecule, but on the wisdom, care, and circumstances with which it is used. The journey continues, from laboratory to battlefield to nightclub to clinic, with no end in sight.